Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining us in another of our Anything app series. Today, we're going to be talking about two things in particular, and then we'll take on whatever else anybody would like to talk about. So the first topic is our App 2017 conference workshop, and we'll get into the agenda of that. And then the topic two is the very big, the very small, and consciousness. And I would like to show you how I believe they are in fact all connected and what they have in common. So, to the App 2017 conference, workshop, and webinar, as you'll see shortly. The location is the Green Valley Ranch Hotel and Casino in really the about 10-15 miles, I guess, outside of Las Vegas in Henderson. And the theme, as you can see here, is consciousness is fundamental, remote viewing, health, wealth, wisdom. The idea here is mostly about fun, being people that have a similar worldview. We don't often get a chance to meet together as a group. But I want to put this in a bigger context because it is part of what's going on here. And the bigger context is basically APP's mission in bringing more and more and more people into the consciousness world, what I see as a consciousness paradigm shift. And the mission here, the applied precog mission, is to publicly explore, this must be on a timer, research and apply logic and intuition emotion to predict future event outcomes, enabling participants to evolve personally while contributing to the elevation of global consciousness. So this important part of the mission to not only evolve personally, but get society involved. We really want global consciousness to get over the fact that the world of consciousness indeed by many is considered what I would call flat. Things like telepathy, precognition, psychokinesis would be just inconceivable to them. They would consider that not at all possible. And yet those of us in our community know that that's the way the world is. The world of consciousness is not flat. And that's one of the big missions that I'm devoted to and APP is devoted to. And so bringing in new members is a very important part of what we're working on doing, and bringing them to this conference is a way of beginning to educate them and seeing that, this is not in fact crazy. Okay, remote viewing, health, wealth, and wisdom. I have come to believe that ARV, this associative remote viewing, actually demonstrates perhaps better than any other way, but certainly most other ways, how the future and the past are indeed entangled, and entangled in a very personal way. There's nothing better than when an individual does one of those dynamite ARV sessions where there's no question that they were getting information from the future, that you begin to realize that this universe of ours, in fact, is much grander than we usually give it credit for. So ARV is just important in lots of different ways. The workshop is, and as you'll see, we have mostly workshops. We're going to be doing 6 predictions. The workshop is about the participants enjoying themselves, with others who want to explore the mysteries of precognition, retrocausality. Retrocausality is now more and more being used at conferences and papers for precognition. But I actually like that word because it gives the direct feeling of the future influencing, say, the past or the present, which is ultimately what precognition is about as well. And you want to learn, in addition to this, from the great speakers and from each other. Now here's the big picture overview. I'll be talking about the speakers and their topics next, but the format is intended to be informal. We'll be having multiple tables, so you'll be able to sit around and be with, people you already know, but also making new friends, and the informal flow between the tables. This year there'll be no specific table assignments like we did in the past. So you'll be free to sit at one table one time and another, so perfectly open. We'll be doing 6 sporting event predictions and feedback, and probably Major League Baseball. It's that season. They may all be that way. We may throw in a different one. We haven't made those decisions yet. Now, for the first time at this level of our summer conference, we're going to have independent and self-judging. This is still in many people's minds controversial. Joe McMonagle, as many of you know, is definitely a very strong advocate of independent judging. However, and I've had this discussion with him, and he agrees that for some people, and the data supports this, self-judging works fine. And so there's no problem with it being an independent choice. So we're setting things up this time where people can do independent or self-judging. When we do the judging, those who want to be independently judged will leave their transcripts behind. We'll have independent judges do them there, while all of us in the conference room will be looking at the 2 potential targets. And we'll only be doing one transcript, one coordinate per prediction. But as you all know, ARV has 2 potential targets for the 2 potential outcomes. So that's what the judging is all about. And wagering, of course, is always optional, but we're in Las Vegas, and a lot of us will want to wager. And as always, I always have to emphasize, wager wisely and get rich slowly. Once you get the precognition works, just integrate it in your life and wager slowly. That's one of the themes that we always emphasize here. Now, we will have a webinar. The webinars will be for the 6 principal speakers, and those who cannot attend are encouraged to hear those speakers live because they'll be able to ask questions of them. And right now the webinar cost is $100. This was the setup from last year, and you can see the informal kind of arrangement of separate tables. This is not the standard classroom like where everybody is sitting in front of chairs lined up one after another. This is our format. And in the center is where we have materials. We'll have Play-Doh again. Some people like to do that sort of thing as part of their transcript. They might very well make a model. So we always have a supply table here. Now the speakers, what a tremendous lineup we have. Joe McMonagle and Dean have now become regulars. They've been at every one of our conferences for the last maybe 4 years, and they'll continue. Well, Joe is there physically for the whole time. Dean is via webinar. I keep trying to get him to come, but he just is doing too much travel with other workshops and webinars and speeches he's doing at that time. So he'll be webinar only. Lynn Buchanan was planning on being there, and now it's just a question because, as you know, he was very ill. So that's open. I think he would certainly be able to do this as a webinar only if he doesn't feel up to traveling. I'm hoping June is far enough in the future that indeed he'll feel healthy enough to join us. And then we have Tom Campbell with his big toe model. Linda's talking about health. Well, I'll go over their topics in a minute. And then we have Steve Browdy, and he always has interesting topics, and you'll see his in a minute. And then John Herlosky and I will be doing the talking at the beginning, and in terms of the teaching and the setup of what's going to follow for the rest. So we'll be doing the first prediction, but using it as an opportunity to teach the newbies, as well as have everybody get into the way we're going to be doing the other 5 predictions. So we're using the first prediction as a teaching mechanism. And then Nancy, those of you who have been involved with that know she's been leading the dream work, so she's going to be discussing that. And then we have myself here. So let's talk about the agenda. We're starting on Thursday, June 22 in the morning. So a lot of people are flying into the hotel the night before. And what we're doing here is, after the welcome between 9 and 3:30, we're going to be talking about ARV, the remote viewing. John's going to focus on the analysis and judging, and we're going to do feedback. So we'll be doing a sports prediction for the first 5 innings. So it will be done by 2 o'clock, and then we can do a feedback session. So we'll get to go through everything in the morning, and that'll be just a lot of fun and teaching and learning. And then Lynn will get up, or webinar, depending on how he's feeling. And again, I don't know, he's a tough cookie, obviously, so hopefully he'll be able to join us. And he's going to be talking about a remote viewing self-healing tool. Remember, our theme is health, wealth, wisdom, and this whole idea of self-healing. I personally believe, and I think Lynn would agree with this, that ultimately all healing is self-healing. What other healers do, the Reiki healers, other famous healers, really activate your system. That's certainly my belief. And we'll see what he has to say. So, you know, it's his presentation. Now, all of these gold ones are our main speakers, okay, and they'll be in the webinar. And then that evening we'll have a spoon bending party. And then, okay, so the next day, again, we're doing another prediction and judging. We're leaving ourselves an hour and a half for that in the morning, another one in the afternoon. Joe will be talking about wisdom about money/wealth from 40 plus years of remote viewing. You know, we talked about what his topic should be, you know, and with that theme, and he says, well, look, I've been doing this for over 40 years and supporting myself. So that seemed like it would be worthwhile to talk about. And I hope he makes the distinction be just doing it for money as opposed to the wealth, where you do, in fact, as he does all the time with his pro bono work, sharing with the community at large. Then Nancy will be talking about dreaming. And then Dean Radin comes up, and he's talking about science and real magic. And of course, in this context, real magic means just the sort of thing that we do that's out of the ordinary, that makes the world indeed, the world of consciousness, not flat. His sub title is Bringing Esoteric Love and Practices Up to Date. So that should be quite interesting. Okay, and then on Saturday, again, we'll be doing 2 predictions, morning and afternoon, and Steve Browdy is talking about taking macro PK seriously. What Steve does, and we've seen this in previous work he's done with Talk With, including Life After Death, is takes a really hard scientific look at the best available data and interpretation. And like with Life After Death, he did not conclude that we know for sure that there is life after death. You know, he gave cases which had the best evidence, gave alternate interpretations, including that one. And it'll be very interesting to see what he does with macro PK. It wouldn't surprise me there if he actually concludes that it's real, just because I've seen some pretty darn good cases, but we'll see what he does. But he does it in a really detailed scientific way, so I'm looking forward to hearing his presentation. And then Tom Campbell is talking about retrocausality and my big toe, where toe, as most of you may already know, stands for theory of everything. And so many of us in this field of psi and consciousness have always been upset with the classical physicists when they talk about theory of everything, because all they consider is the physical world. And yet the thing we know the most for sure is that we have personal consciousness. We are aware beings. And Tom and others, but Tom is one of the foremost people on that right now, has a theory of everything which includes consciousness, includes retrocausality, which is another word for precognition. And I'm really looking forward to what he has to say about that. So, okay, so that's Saturday. And then Sunday we do 1 prediction. Sunday's a half day. And then I'm going to get up and talk about personal creativity for health, wealth, and wisdom, because I believe those actually are very, very important. And in my talks, I always summarize apps last year, hit rates, what we're doing in terms of also APPI. We have the Precog professionals, and once a year I always summarize the status of that, including how the different groups are doing, etc. So that'll happen during my talk. Okay. John, you asked a question. How are we planning group predictions without table assignments? It's not clear. We will have individual group predictions. There will be one giant group prediction, though one person put out we could have an app facilitator to just collect them by groups just to get sub predictions. We haven't made that final determination yet, but we'll all be together with the judges that are doing independent judging and self-judging, and we could do more than a count, because one of the points I want to make with judging is that people do it differently. And I'm going to have my cell phone set up so I can actually look at some of the people who have the best transcripts, because people may very well, in terms of wagering, want to do it based on the best transcript, And ultimately, I will end off making the group prediction, but I'll certainly talk to everybody who's there to see what they think, and we'll talk about it. But as always, I want to make a ultimate group prediction, if nothing else, for part of the record. Okay, and if there are any more questions, you all should be able to turn on your mics. So I prefer that because I really can't see the chat box on the other screen. Okay. Now, topic 2. Are there any other questions? I don't want to move off that. Okay, so discussion between D-Ray, there's a back one on YouTube. They even discuss a possible joint experiment. Okay, well, okay, John, yeah. Their collaboration, again, I'd love you to do a talk with on that. Maybe I can get Dean to do a talk with on. He must understand Tom's model. Because that whole subject area, of course, is of great interest to us in app. Okay, if there's nothing more on the app 2017 conference, and of course I encourage all of you, the one thing I didn't say, and hopefully people will hear this before January 31st, because we do have a very early bird special going, which will save you $100 from the early bird, and for a $325 now, and it's going to go to $425 starting February 1. So you might really consider making that decision now. Okay, so let's go to topic 2. The very big, the very small, and consciousness. What do they have in common? Now, what I want to start with is just to give you a real feeling for what I mean by the very big and the very small. There's this great site. I'm hearing music. You guys aren't hearing the music that's coming from this side, are you? I don't think so. I wish that were transmitted to you, but okay.
I don't hear anything, Marty.
Yeah,
it's fine.
Just me. Okay, yeah, that's fine. So here we are, and I'm going to go through big scales and small scales. This one is a scale from here to here, and they're all that. So this distance from here to here, which here is 1 meter, and in terms of factors of 10, I think you all understand a factor of 10. With the 0 here, this basically means 1 meter. 10 to the 1 would be 10 meters. 10 to the 2 would be 100 meters. And then we're going to go the other way. But first, let's go up. So here we are, 1 meter size. So here's a guy who may be almost 6 feet tall, right? Well over. A meter's roughly a yard. So he's not quite 6 feet. Anyway, this is a meter size scale. Nice big meter diameter ball. Okay, now let's move this forward. And now we're getting, the scale in here is getting bigger. See, our person got smaller here. Here's a dinosaur that's roughly a meter or so tall. We're getting bigger, big oak tree. You can see the dinosaur size. We're getting bigger and bigger. We're now at 100 meters in here. Here's 10 squared, yeah. I guess the Statue of Liberty must be about 100 meters tall. Let's go further. Okay, we're over 1,000 meters now. We're getting into scales like mountains. Get bigger. Okay, I went pretty far. We're up to 10 to the 5th here. Here's the Grand Canyon, countries, West Virginia. And then, of course, guess what? We're now leading to stuff in our galaxy. Here's Earth. at 10 to the 7th. So now we're up to bigger powers of 10. Saturn, 10 to the 8th. So now you're on size scales which get real big. 10 to the 9th, that's a billion. When you hear a word billion, you can see how much bigger than a billion meters would be. And that's sort of the point. We don't really have a good sense of what these numbers are on the big scale. And of course, they get bigger and bigger. We eventually get to, I went through 10 to the 12th. We're right now about 10 to the 12th. That's a trillion. So when you hear numbers like a trillion with this many zeros, we're getting to be the size of even small stars. And I guess our star we might have passed already. But a trillion, when they say $1 trillion debt, we don't really have a sense of what that means except very, very, very big. And we can keep going. And we now get other galaxies and nebulae. I love it. And now we happen to be up to 10 to the 8th. No, 10 to the 18th. Sorry. Okay. So this is 10 to the 18th in there. Sagittarius dwarf galaxy. Okay, so we can just keep going. There's the Andromeda galaxy. We're up to 10 to the 21st. 21 zeros. Okay, so let's go all the way out. Okay, here we are at about 10 to the 26, 10 to the 27. Okay, 27 zeros. The whole observable universe. Now that means the distance that light has traveled from our perspective. Okay, so as if we were in the center of the earth, that's all that would be observable. I don't know what they drew here, but be very careful to think that this ends. In fact, this is the first time I can use the word that I'm going to use when later in another model of a circle without a boundary. The universe clearly can't have a boundary, right? It can't end with a brick wall. So this is the perspective from Earth, but no matter where you are in the universe, you would have an observable universe that would be about the same size because that's the speed of light, but there's no end to the universe. So this is like a circle without a boundary, kind of a Zen thing. Okay, now let's start going back. Okay, so now, wait, I do want to start us at about 1. Okay, so here we're still sizes we understand. This is 10 to the minus 1. Here's a mouse for you. Earthworm. Okay, so these are things we have a sense of. Now, how about an ant? Okay, we're getting smaller, 10 to the minus 3-ish in here, 0.001 meters. That's like 1/10 of a centimeter or millimeter or so. Here's a human egg. Here's a human hair. We're down to about 10 to the minus 4 meters. So that's the size of a human hair. 10 to the minus 5. Now this is interesting. Chromosome in here, 10 to the minus 5-ish. Okay, we're now down to cell size and smaller. Here's the biggest virus is about 10 to the minus 6, the millionth of a meter, getting smaller and smaller and smaller. and smaller. We're now getting down to angstrom sizes, which is wavelength sizes. They measure those in angstroms. Getting smaller, 10 to the minus 12 meters, and we still have a long way to go. Oop, I don't know what I did there. I must have clicked on a link. Fermometers, we're now getting down to atom sizes. This is uranium nucleus. Remember, uranium is one of the biggest and heaviest atoms. So we're now down to 10 to the minus 13. Getting smaller and smaller. Here's quarks, which are the things that make up protons and neutrons. Here's a neutrino. I happen to like neutrinos personally. I'll tell you a little bit more maybe about that, but that's 10 to the minus about 20. So we have no real sense, just like when people tell you trillion, what it means, 10 to the minus 20, so small, definitely out of our normal size understanding. Here's another neutrino, 10 to the minus 24. Neutrinos happen to be the particle with the smallest mass in the physical world. Okay, light has a rest mass, but while it's moving, it has no mass per se. Okay, smaller and smaller. Notice they don't even have anything they can point to below the neutrino. But then you get down to here. This is, in terms of our best understanding of the way the universe works, which is quantum mechanics at the small scale, which is what we've been through since we got lower than 10 to the minus 10 or so, say. You get down to the Planck length, okay, which is about 10 to the minus 35 meters. Who knows what that means? But quantum mechanics has this whole idea of individual elements. You know, there's one electron. There's not 1.5 electrons. And that happens to go for length. Excuse me. The smallest size in quantum mechanics is what's called the Planck length, and that's 10 to the minus 35. Now down at that level, and you've probably heard of string theory, so that's like the size of these strings. Down at that level we have what could be called a quantum foam, and that's what I want to talk about next in terms of models of our universe. Now we're down at the scale of the very, very small. Quantum foam, what is that? Okay, what does that mean? Well, that is also called zero-point energy field. In quantum mechanics, and let me get back to my slideshow now. In quantum mechanics, that comes from the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, and there is an excellent YouTube discussion here. In fact, let me see if I can put that in the chat box. Let me see if I can get that. Yeah, here, I've got it over on my other screen here. It's kind of big here, but let me see. Okay, there it is. So I really encourage you to look at that. The guy who discussed it is from the Fermi lab, which really is like the top particle physics lab in our nation, probably the world. And it talks about this thing which they call quantum foam. Others starting to call it quantum foam, maybe quantum vacuum. Hal Puthoff, as you know, who is very much involved in remote viewing, went off to work in this field of zero-point energy and quantum vacuum. But the quantum foam is going to be what I'm going to use here. It has a good feeling to it. And if you want to just focus on that, it's in 3.5 minutes into this 10-minute video. Okay, now let me tell you a little bit about the uncertainty principle. But I need to do one other thing. This music is actually getting annoying to me. So let me turn that off. That's better. Okay. In the quantum field, one of the two fundamental kinds of principles on the basis of it is the uncertainty principle. Now, I love this cartoon. It's just sort of fun, but it sets you up for, okay, you're the one for me, and old Alice here, and they use Bob and Alice a lot when they talk about communication in the quantum world, instant communication potentially, and how does that work? In a quantum world, how can we be sure? The other thing I want to point out to you is the symbol psi. The symbols they use, psi plus and psi minus, are the things which get combined to make observations in the physical world. I love the fact, and that's why in app we use psi in our logo, and so does APPI, because it also it is the symbol psi for like psychic phenomenon, as well as what's used in quantum mechanics. And of course, I believe that those are indeed connected. So, the Heisenberg uncertainty principle applies to energy and time. They're called conjugate variables. Don't worry about the word conjugate. It's often used in terms of not being able to know where a particle is and its velocity with perfect certainty at the same time. Now here, and this is in fact, in my opinion, the most important application of the Heisenberg uncertainty principle, it applies to energy and time such that it is impossible to have a perfect vacuum. Now that's kind of amazing. That's why one of the words they use here is quantum vacuum, because you can't have nothing. So even at a temperature of absolute zero, T equals 0 Kelvin, where all the classical theories would predict zero energy, nothing going on, it turns out there is a spontaneous creation of particles and antiparticles for very, 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 put, 25, 35 zeros, 35 verys there, brief periods of time. Because that very small space we talked about leads to very small minimum time intervals that are real, though, but they're down at very small periods, the time it might take for light to go across one of those spatial dimensions. Very, very small time. Everybody agrees with this, and there is scientific evidence for this. So you have to understand, while psi is controversial at the level of psychic phenomenon, it is not controversial about the reality of this quantum foam. Okay, so you just have to get that. That is the universe we live in. And the energies that we talk about at this level are enormous. They're like the energies associated with a nuclear explosion, per square meter or something like that. But it's very, very uniform. And so you don't feel it. Like if you're a fish at the deepest parts of the ocean, that pressure doesn't bother you, and all you do is small variations among that, within that pressure field. We are living in something like that in an energy field. Okay, so if indeed you come from this field, you are coming from nothing. I think I did not point this out, and in this link I gave you, he makes the point that nothing is really something. okay, that this field, and this is going to be one of my main themes in my model, is that everything in the physical world comes from this, what we would call nothing, okay, at the level I'm talking about now. So this Planck length, this quantum foam, let's start assuming that these virtual particles, these particles and antiparticles that come into existence, annihilate to pure energy, go out of existence in infinitesimal time scales, they exist everywhere in space. Now this is the connection. Remember, one of the themes here is, what's the connection between the very large and the very small? Well, this is the connection. Once you really get, and again, physicists do not agree that in our physical world, this quantum foam is real. So there are these particles going in and out, in and out, in and out in times that we have no real sense of, but everywhere. Well, guess what that means? The very, very large is made up of what? Essentially an infinite number of very, very small places. So I don't care how large your perspective is, if you go down in any one of those places and get smaller and smaller and smaller, you're going to get into this 0-point energy. So as far as I can tell, there is nothing else conceptually that is everywhere, and this holds for every time in the physical universe. So this quantum foam is rather special because it is everywhere and every time in the very big, and this is the connection is with the very small. There's your neutrino. Turns out you've got about trillions of those going through your body every second. Who knows? Maybe in some way they're the connection. Remember, they're moving very close. Neutrinos are the lightest entity that we know of which has mass. So separate from light, which moves faster, these are moving almost at the speed of light. And maybe they carry information in the physical world. Either that or light, who knows? But here we're talking very small distances, but you're filled with them all the time. Now what about DNA? Here we're at 10 to the minus 35, point with 35 zeros. Here we're 24. Okay, here we only have 8. But in every part of your DNA, you can get smaller and smaller from 10 to the minus 8 down to 10 to the minus 35. But every one of your DNA, all your chromosomes are connected through this. Okay? So your whole body, every cell in your body, every DNA thing in your body is connected. Now I looked up, because I thought it was interesting, how many cells are there in your body? Well, it turns out there are 30 trillion is the estimate. Yeah, give or take a few trillion. And bacteria, 40 trillion according to this estimate, which I thought was very interesting. I mean, everything that we're involved in has so many of trillions of numbers involved in them. And yet, and this is such a major point, consciousness, somehow with all of this stuff going on, and we're able to have a sense of the very small, the very large, the fact that we are made up of so many cells, we have this consciousness of a unity, okay? And that's why this whole idea of consciousness being fundamental seems right on. And more, I'm seeing, and you're probably seeing too, this theme being around in one form or another, that consciousness is the most fundamental thing, and perhaps the physical world comes from that? Let me put that out as a question just to have in the back of your mind now. But conscious itself might, in fact, come from this same nothingness. Now, in the physical space occupied by your complex body, right? Trillions of cells, all connected down to this Planck length. So in this physical space occupied by your body, you are experiencing this mysterious and really awesome personal conscious moments in space-time. There's perhaps this unifying mechanism indeed is the quantum phone. And you've probably guessed that that's what I indeed believe. I mean, how do you get your personal feeling of conscious moments? How do you get precognition, connecting up with your own future moments? How could that possibly make sense? Well, at least for me, it only makes sense if I get into this idea of a quantum foam, which is connecting everything. So let's, okay, and I want to now give you a bit of my model, and we'll move on. But first, a joke, okay? This is pretty heavy stuff we're talking about here. Here's a joke. What do the very poor have that the rich want, and if you eat enough of it, you will die? Nothing. So I hope I got a smile or a chuckle out of all of you. You know, your mics are all off, so I can't tell. But the first time I came across that or something like that, I sort of laughed and felt it was quite relevant. But notice what this means. Perhaps the closest we can come to nothing is the idea of nothing. I want to move us now from the physical world to the world of ideas. Now, ideas are in our mind. I don't know how much mass they have, but that may be as close as we can come to nothing. But nevertheless, the idea of nothing is in what I now want to introduce to you, this idea of a universe of collective consciousness. An idea now, you're conscious of this idea. So nothing is in this universe of collective consciousness. Now you're conscious of this idea, right? We're talking about it, you're conscious of it. This is only one example of a consciousness thing. You got lots of ideas in your head, including the fact that you're listening. You have sounds, okay? You have conscious experiences right now. In fact, all of your previous life can be looked at as nothing but a series of conscious moments, right? You see things, you hear things, you smell things, you think about things, you have emotions. What is it that you have? A series of conscious moments in now moments. Everything else is in the past. We imagine the future, but what you have that you know for sure are the here and now conscious moments. Now, this UCC, Universal Collective Consciousness, is just like, I think it's a different word. I like it because it brings in collective consciousness. Just like the Matrix, I believe in Ingo Swann. I never got to discuss this with Ingo, but I think he would agree that it's like the Matrix. And the other thing is Carl Jung's concept. And it turns out I have a personal friend who actually studies and teaches this, and she's a Jungian psychotherapist. And she, frankly, after many discussions, she did not agree with this at the beginning, agrees that, yes, Carl was really talking about the same thing. And someday I really want her to give a talk on this in a talk with. But anyway, it is the collective unconscious. We disagreed and for a long time on the word unconscious versus submerged consciousness. Came to believe it was the same thing. Now, okay, so let's look a little closer at this UCC. Everything that consciousness touches, I don't know what other way to put it, but if ever consciousness touched it, any body, any sentient being had a thought, a touch, an emotion, whatever, it's in this universe of collective consciousness, because that is the definition of collective consciousness. Now, a thing, nothing, would be an example of a thing in here, but so would your current conscious moment. The idea of a desk, the idea of classical mechanics, the idea of quantum mechanics, those equations, everything is in here because consciousness has touched it, okay? But there's something very interesting and I think significant to notice about that. This indeed is a circle without a boundary, in the same way our physical universe is. Because if you were to postulate something else that had to be outside here, so it was a thought, but that's not in here. Well, as soon as you thought it, it's in there. So any thought, any emotion that you think should be outside, the very fact that you thought it, you felt it, you experienced it, it's not in there. It's in there. Okay? So this is a circle without a boundary in exactly the same way the physical universe does not have a boundary. That's kind of cool. Okay, so whenever you see this circle, it really doesn't have a boundary. Now, let me see if we can go just a little further with this. Now, no boundary implies that there are no separations. This, the circle without a boundary, the universe of collective consciousness, all that is, really is the ultimate in oneness and harmony. It's a spiritual concept, in my opinion. I'm willing to use that word spiritual in the sense that we're now talking about, because we're talking about everything that consciousness touches. Okay? Now, let's talk about this thing. Whatever this thing is, a sound, I'm pounding, it's consciousness that you have now. A memory that you might have had in the past, what you think of as a desk, okay? Those things, by the very nature of no separateness, have to have a fuzzy boundary, because it cannot be separated. It can't go outside the circle because there's no boundaries there. So it must have what I'll call a fuzzy boundary. Okay? So anything must have this fuzzy boundary. But guess what? It remains entangled with this universe of collective consciousness. It has to remain entangled because it can't be separate from it, because nothing is separate. You can't get outside it. Now, energy is required to create whatever this thing is that has a fuzzy boundary. Okay? You have this harmony and unity, but now you're trying to bring out one thing as if it were separate, even though it isn't, and that takes a certain amount of energy. That's what I'm going to almost define as what energy is, trying to make a thing separate from the universe of collective consciousness. Okay, let's connect this now with associative remote viewing and precognition. Events are in the universe of collective consciousness. You know, you go to a baseball game. When did that event start? When you first thought about going? When you got in the car to go? When you got in the parking lot? That's the kind of things that make things fuzzy. Because really, when you think about any one thing, there's always some certain amount of vagueness and fuzziness in it. Okay, but guess what? You've had a lot of events in your life. This moment right now is an event. The tapping, hearing this is an event. Part of bigger events. Part of your day is an event. But one thing we're able to do, and it's kind of remarkable that we can actually do this, we are able to ignore events. So you can ignore all those events. Thank goodness. How'd you like to have to experience them all at once? Okay. You can ignore events. So you can make the entanglement with those events and you decrease. Well, guess what? You can increase entanglement as well. And what about one event being your RV session, another event being your feedback session, and our work in ARV and precognition is in fact to be able to increase that entanglement. And we know that happens. I mean, certainly we have certain memories that are stronger than other memories, hopefully mostly the happy ones that you can retrieve more easily, say. So this idea of increasing entanglement, also in physics, they talk about physical ways of increasing and decreasing entanglement. So that concept is not foreign to you. And it's like increasing a handshake. One of the physicists will use that term. So the idea here is you can increase this entanglement and you can enhance the entanglement energy associated with these two events. And I believe that perspective is very important in the ARV world that we're involved in. And frankly, with all precognition, you need to get that entanglement between specific events, the one that you're connected with into the future. Okay, so that's the model. Let me pause here before we go on to the third one. I'm now looking at the chat box. I probably no questions, comments. I hope you sort of got the ideas. Okay. At some point in time, John, I'd love us to talk about this and to see how it connects up with what Tom Campbell does. But this is the connection of consciousness, which comes from the very small, which connects up with the very large. Okay, other topics that anybody wants to raise? This is a good time to do it. Any other comments, questions, anything about the conference, what I just went through, or any other topic?
I have a question, Marnie, if it's okay.
Shoot.
So you're talking about the very big and the very small, and I was wondering, with regards to PK, why does it seem like, maybe it's my misperception, but it seems like micro PK is fairly consistent and not very hard to do, whereas macro PK, spoon bending or levitating a table or flying or something like that was nearly impossible. I was just wondering what your thoughts on that are.
That's excellent, and I've struggled with that too. And here is, okay, let me just give me a moment to try to bring it up again. Here is my best explanation for that in the terms of this model, okay? And it works in terms of this model, my explanation. Okay, PK, we're talking about macro effects now, not, you know, influencing a computer, which you can easily see could be just you're choosing a time to get those 0 and 1s to come up, and you've chosen just the right time to click a mouse or something. Okay, that's called micro PK, for those of you that might not have understood that question. But macro PK, I mean, it's not only spoon bending. Steve Browdy gave an example of a person who levitated. And there are all kinds of stories of macro things being moved across rooms. In fact, Simeon Hine personally witnessed a cigarette being put from several meters away into his pocket, blew his mind, changed his whole worldview about what was possible, and we did a talk with him on it. Okay, so that's macro PK. How can that happen? Here's my explanation. I've given you examples of that. Those examples are down in idea space. Imagine if down in idea space, I want to bend this spoon. Okay, let's use the spoon bending idea, which is not the most dramatic, but it's the one that came to mind. Down in this universe of collective consciousness is the idea of this spoon being in the bent state in the future. Not worrying about the mechanism on how it got there, just there it is. This spoon that I'm holding right now is bent in some fashion I won't even define, but I know that when I look at it, it's going to be, oh, that's amazing, or something like that. That's part of the idea of it. So in that space, I'm adding energy now to that spoon being bent. You know, and now I'm thinking, I know even when I'm thinking that, maybe it's really twirled in a way I knew I couldn't do physically, because that's the idea I would like to experience. So I put it out there, and it may, in other examples, be put out there subconsciously, where the idea could be put out there even by another person. But notice it's out there in this idea space. Now, by one mechanism or another, during spoon bending parties, people often shout, pay attention to something else and shout, adding energy to that idea, which then permits it in this model to manifest at a future time. That general idea works for any PK experience because it comes first from this idea space in the universal collective consciousness, right? The idea of this happening is out there. How it gets the energy to manifest in the physical world is, of course, part of the mystery of how lots of things manifest. But that's my best explanation, for better or worse, John.
Can I comment on that?
Please.
So we were talking about, I know it's hard to go from micro to macro, even from traditional physics models, because if you're talking about quantum theory, Newtonian theory, they're not a great match. But this is one of the things that I like about Tom Campbell's theory. You can affect your reality. Like your reality now is your spoon is straight, and then you look down later and your spoon is bent. Those are two different realities. And I like his theory because if we're talking about, if we consider like the actual movie, The Matrix, where they're actually in a computer simulation, they don't realize it. If you want your, I always come back to that scene where Neo is talking to the kid in The Matrix, and he's like, "There is no spoon," and that's how he's able to bend it because it's not really there. If we just accept simulation theory for a second, it allows us to bend a spoon without being subject to the law of thermodynamics. Like we don't. So if you want to physically bend a spoon, you have to use kinetic energy or thermal energy in order to do it. But if we're just changing computer code or an idea, there is no energy transfer. You're just transferring an idea within consciousness space. That's why I think it fits really well, because if you're going to do spoon bending, we would be able to scientifically measure the energy required, you know, and it doesn't seem like there is any, as far as I can tell. So not to harp on Tom Campbell, I was just kind of making that comment.
No, I think that's beautiful. And let me tell you, I see that being totally consistent with what I just put out, and let me tell you why. Remember, I went down to this universe of collective consciousness with ideas. What's the energy in ideas? The ideas are sitting there. And then that idea of the spoon being bent comes back up. Now there, I didn't say how, but I would say that did use energy, which it got from the 0-point energy field, from the quantum foam, because it did take energy to change that spoon. I would maintain that, if nothing else, a shape change by itself moved through gravity. That was energy. I'll go further, though. In the spoon case, I can even postulate that there are micro flaws which could be activated with very little energy. But this universe of collective consciousness has so much energy that while I don't have to say how it did it, I don't understand how it did it, but that cigarette defying gravity or the spoon bending, in fact, interacted with an energy field, our normal physics, physical-based energy field. But where did that energy come from? It came from this quantum foam field based on the idea of it. Now, I don't see that being any different. The field is a simulation field. You somehow got one idea and then connected it through your computer simulation to the other idea, and then the trick is, how did that manifest? But it did. Now, well, so I see the two being very similar. The manifestation phase, I don't think either of them handle real well. All we do is say, hey, it manifested. You know, how did the computer simulation, in fact, change, which made it manifest in our physical world? I doubt. I'd like to hear what Tom would say about that. In fact, I can't wait to be with him in June, because we can talk about this sort of thing, and hopefully you'll be there as well to participate in the conversations. But I don't see, yeah, so I don't see any contradiction. Okay, other comments, questions? Okay, so yeah, okay, this is good. We've gone just about the right amount of time. Nobody wants to make further comments. I thank you all for coming, and I will end this now, and I will